She was rejected. Publicly. By the man who was supposed to protect her. And then she saved his children while his chosen wife drove away. You already know which woman you respect more. But here's the question nobody's asking: why did he choose the wrong one in the first place? The Ironwood Pack had a hierarchy. Rigid, merciless, designed to keep certain people exactly where they were told to belong. At the bottom of that hierarchy was Cynthia, a rejected Omega, working utility staff in the East Service wing of a royal estate that didn't know she existed. Sleeping in a room with no window. Pulling her sleeve over a rejection scar every single morning. Listening through stone walls to the sound of two little boys that nobody else seemed to hear. Above her, Luna wore a crown she had engineered, a marriage she had infiltrated, and a plan that required 2 children to die in a fire she had already arranged. On the night that fire started, both women made a choice. One of them got in her car. One of them ran barefoot. I want to tell you everything that happened after that, because what Cynthia carried out of that burning tower wasn't just 2 wolf pups. It was the truth about what this pack was built on, who it was built for, and what it costs when the wrong people decide who is worth saving. Stay with me. This one matters. If you made it this far, you already care about this story, and I think you know why. Because it's not really about wolves. It's about what happens to the people the world decides don't count. And what they do anyway. This channel exists because stories like this deserve to be told properly, with stakes, with craft, with the kind of emotional honesty that most content won't go near because it's harder to produce and slower to pay off. If that's the kind of storytelling you want more of, subscribing takes 3 seconds, and it's the only reason channels like this survive. Every subscriber tells the algorithm this story was worth the time. Without that signal, it disappears. You watched this far. You clearly thought it was worth your time. Tell the algorithm you agree. The utility room at the far end of the East Service wing had no window. Cynthia had stopped minding that after the first month. Windows meant seeing the courtyard, and the courtyard meant seeing the main entrance, and the main entrance meant watching Robert walk in and out of his own estate like a king who had never done a single wrong thing in his life. The dark was easier. She had made the room into something livable the way she made everything livable, quietly, without asking permission, using what was left over. A wool blanket folded twice for thickness. A crate turned on its side for a shelf. 3 books she'd found in the discard pile outside the estate library, their spines broken, their pages soft with age. She had read all 3 so many times she could recite them without looking. It was that or think, and thinking cost more than she had most nights. She was sitting on the edge of the cot, not sleeping, not reading. Just listening. That was the other thing the dark was good for. Sound traveled differently when there was nothing to distract the eye. It became precise, directional, layered. She could hear the senior guards changing rotation on the north wall. She could hear the kitchen staff banking the ovens for the night 2 floors below. And above her, through the stone ceiling that separated the service wing from the residential towers, she could hear the twins. Eli first, he always woke first, made a small restless sound, and then settled. Then Cole, who slept deeper and harder and sometimes laughed in his sleep in a way that made Cynthia press her palm flat against the ceiling as though she could reach them through the rock. She had no reason to love those boys. They were not hers. They belonged to the man who had stood in front of 200 witnesses and declared her unworthy of his bond, and to the woman he had chosen instead. By every law of pack hierarchy, by every social convention that governed her rank, Cynthia was not supposed to feel anything about the Alpha King's heirs except the correct and appropriate distance of a utility staff member doing her job. She pulled her left sleeve down over her wrist. The fabric caught on the edge of the scar and she smoothed it flat without looking. She never looked at it anymore. Looking didn't change what it was, a pale, ridged line where a bond mark had once burned gold uncertain under her skin, back when she had been foolish enough to believe that what she felt and what was true were the same thing. Robert had corrected that misunderstanding efficiently. Publicly. In the kind of voice that left no room for interpretation. The scar was not healed. It was managed. There was a difference, and she had learned it. Above her, both boys were quiet now. She exhaled. The sound of heels on stone came down the corridor outside her door, sharp, deliberate, the specific rhythm of someone who wore expensive shoes and wanted the floor to know it. Cynthia didn't move. A moment later she heard the jeweled case, that small metallic click it made when Bridget shifted it from one hand to the other, and then the footsteps past her door without slowing. Without pausing. Without the faintest suggestion that anything existed on the other side of that door worth acknowledging. Cynthia counted to 10 after the sound faded. An old habit. It kept her from doing anything her face would give away. She reached for the book on the crate. Then she smelled it. Not the stone. Not the banked kitchen fires. Not the first edge of winter coming through the gaps in the estate walls. Something underneath all of that, sharp and chemical and wrong in the specific way that the body recognizes before the mind catches up. Burning. Not wood. Stone. The kind of heat that had been building long enough to change what it touched. She was on her feet before the thought finished forming. She was through the service door and into the corridor before the alarm sounded, and when it did sound, distant and mechanical and 2 full seconds behind what her body already knew, she was already running. Barefoot on cold stone, sleeves still pulled to her knuckles, the wool blanket snatched from the cot and trailing from one hand. The nursery tower. North wing. 2nd floor. She took the service stairs 3 at a time, hit the landing, turned the corner, and stopped. The nursery door was white oak with iron fittings, painted carefully, maintained like everything in this estate that was meant to be seen. It looked perfectly intact. It was locked from the outside. Someone had locked it from the outside. Inside, she could hear them. Both of them. Awake and coughing and frightened and alive, for now, for this moment, Cynthia put her shoulder against the door and hit it with everything she had. The emergency signal reached Robert at 2:53 a.m., 6 minutes after the nursery alarm triggered and 4 minutes after the Ironwood Estate's fire suppression system failed to activate. He was in the Northern Territories, 300 miles out, sitting across a table from 2 clan elders who had been arguing the same border dispute for 11 years. He felt the signal before his beta spoke it, a cold crack through the chest, the pack bond pulling taut like a wire under sudden weight. He was in the air within 20 minutes. He did not sleep on the flight. The SUV came through the estate gates at speed, the driver reading something in Robert's silence that made conversation inadvisable. Robert watched the northern mountains give way to the estate grounds through the window and felt his wolf pressing against the inside of his ribs, low and constant, like pressure before a storm. The sky ahead was wrong. Too orange. Too bright for this hour. By the time the vehicle stopped he was already out of it. The north wing was a skeleton. The nursery tower still stood but its interior was gutted, black and smoking and open to the night sky in places where the roof had given. Pack guards moved through the ruins with lights. Somewhere behind him a medical unit was setting up. The blizzard was tamping the last of the flames down, snow hissing against hot stone in a sound like something exhaling its final breath. Bridget was on the lawn. She had positioned herself well, close enough to the activity to appear present, far enough from the ruin to remain clean. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders and she had managed, somehow, to look appropriately devastated, eyes red, a blanket around her shoulders, her hands clasped at her sternum in a posture of helpless grief. She moved toward him when she saw him. Robert, her voice broke on cue. It happened so fast. I tried to reach them, I couldn't get past the smoke, the stairs. He stopped her with one look. Not a word. Just the precise, flat attention of a man who was listening to something other than what she was saying. He smelled her perfume. Perfectly applied, not disrupted by sweat or exertion. He smelled the clean fabric of her clothes, cold from the night air, not from the fire. He smelled her hands when she reached for his arm. No smoke. No ash. No chemical residue of the suppression system. No heat. He smelled the complete absence of the nursery on her skin. Robert stepped past her without touching her and walked into the ruins. The guards parted. No one spoke to him. He moved through the wreckage with his wolf's senses stripped down to a single frequency, find them, find them, find them, stepping over fallen timber, ducking a collapsed section of ceiling, following the thermal traces of where the fire had burned hottest and longest. He found them in what remained of the north alcove, behind a collapsed interior wall that had created a small pocket of survivable space. 2 paramedics were crouched over a shape on the ground. Robert saw his sons first, Eli and Cole, wrapped in something scorched and dark, their small faces smeared with ash but breathing, visibly breathing, Cole's hand fisted in the fabric covering them. The fabric was a jacket. Utility gray. Burned through at the back in a pattern that made Robert go very still, the pattern of someone who had curled around something small and absorbed the heat meant for it with their own body. He crouched. The paramedic said something. Stable, she said, found them shielding, said words about the back, about burns, about immediate transfer. Robert heard the words and filed them and reached down to move a section of debris from beside her head, and then his hand closed over hers in the ash. The bond detonated. There was no other word for it. It was not a slow recognition. It was not a dawning. It was structural, a crack through every wall he had built and maintained and reinforced for 2 years, a sound like something enormous and long suppressed finally breaking the surface. His wolf went silent in shock. His chest did something he didn't have language for. He looked at her face. Ash and blood and the tracks of tears through the soot. Brown skin. The jaw set even in unconsciousness, like her body hadn't finished being determined yet. He knew her. The utility corridor. The service wing. The woman he walked past. The woman he had walked past. Robert gathered her up from the ground, carefully, his hand supporting the ruin of her back, and stood. The paramedic started to protest. He looked at her once and she stopped. He carried Cynthia out through the ruins, past the guards, past the medical unit, past Bridget, who said his name once in a voice pitched to Carrie. He did not stop walking. The Pack Hospital's VIP ward was designed for high-ranking officials, generals, council elders, visiting alphas with political weight and entourages that required managing. It was not designed for a utility staff member from the East Service Wing. Robert had put Cynthia in the best room on the floor anyway, stationed 2 enforcers at the elevator, and pulled a chair directly to the bedside with the specific energy of a man who was not going to be reasoned with about it. He had not changed his clothes. His field coat was stiff with ash and dried blood, her blood, and he sat in it like he hadn't noticed, his forearms on his knees, his eyes on her face. 41 hours. That was how long she had been unconscious. He knew because he had counted them. Dr. Marin came in on the second morning with the bloodwork results and the particular expression of someone delivering information they wished they didn't have. She set the report on the table beside him. She gave him a moment to read the top line. Then she said, quietly, that she needed him to understand what he was looking at before she explained the implications, because the implications were significant. Wolfsbane. Chronic microdosing, trace amounts, consistent over an extended period, calibrated precisely enough to stay below the threshold that would trigger symptoms. Enough to suppress the wolf's instincts incrementally. Enough to alter scent chemistry over time, masking the specific pheromone signature that the bond required to register. Enough, Dr. Marin said carefully, to make a true mate bond functionally invisible to both parties if both parties were being dosed. Robert went very still. Both parties. He thought about the supplements. The ones Bridget had ordered for him 2 years ago, imported, she had said, specifically formulated for alpha wolves under high political stress. He had taken them every morning without question. She had handed them to him herself, sometimes, with the particular wifely attentiveness he had read at the time as care. He stood up and walked to the window and stood there for a long time looking at the mountain line without seeing it. The bond had not failed. It had not been absent. It had been chemically silenced, maintained in darkness like something Bridget had locked in a room and chosen not to feed, hoping it would simply stop existing before anyone found the door. He thought about the rejection ceremony. 2 years ago. The great hall, the full pack assembled, Cynthia standing in front of him with her chin level and her eyes holding something he had read at the time as defiance and now recognized, looking back with what he knew now, as a woman bracing for an impact she had already decided she would survive. He had spoken the words the ceremony required. He had watched the bond mark on her wrist go dark. He had believed he felt nothing because there was nothing to feel. He had felt nothing because Bridget had made sure of it. Robert turned from the window when he heard the sound, small, rough, the specific quality of someone surfacing from somewhere very deep and finding the air strange. Cynthia's eyes opened. They moved to the ceiling first, then to the room, then found him with the confused, cautious focus of someone locating a threat before they locate anything else. He watched her register his face. I watched something complicated move through her expression and get suppressed. She looked at the 4 in her arm. She looked at the ceiling again. "The nursery floor," she said. Her voice was wrecked from the smoke. The boards in the northeast corner were already compromised before the fire. "I don't know if the damage to the substructure was." "Cynthia." He said her name and then couldn't say anything else for a moment. It sat in his throat and would not move. She stopped talking. She looked at him with her sleeve pushed up above the foresight, and he could see the scar, pale and ridged against her inner wrist, fully visible, neither of them acknowledging it. The door opened before either of them could navigate whatever came next. A nurse appeared in the gap, and then a small body ducked under her arm, and then another, and then Eli and Cole were in the room at a dead run, moving with the absolute directional certainty of children who have decided where they are going and do not recognize obstacles. They reached the bed. They climbed it. They arranged themselves against her legs with the efficient, unself-conscious confidence of small creatures returning to somewhere they had always belonged, and Cole put his head down on her knee and closed his eyes. Cynthia looked at them. Then she looked at the ceiling. Her jaw moved once. She didn't cover her wrist. Bridget chose white. It was a precise choice, the kind that looked instinctive but wasn't. White for innocence, white for grief, white for the specific visual language of a woman who had lost something and wanted every camera in the room to register that loss before she spoke a single word. She had also chosen the pack assembly hall rather than a private statement, which told Robert everything about what she was doing before he arrived. She was building a public record, and she was building it first. He watched the feed from the hospital corridor on his Beta's phone. Declan stood beside him without speaking, which was one of the things Robert valued most about him. On the screen, Bridget stood at the hall's central podium with her hands folded and her eyes at the precise angle that caught the light. She spoke about fear. She spoke about the night of the fire, how she had woken to smoke, how the stairs had been impassable, how she had gone for help because she trusted no one inside the estate walls after what she had witnessed. What she had witnessed, she said carefully, was Cynthia. A former pack member. A rejected Omega with documented instability and an unhealthy fixation on the Alpha King's household. She had seen her near the nursery tower. She had seen her with accelerant. She had fled, she said, because she feared for her life. She paused there to collect herself. Declan said, quietly, that they had everything Robert had asked for. Robert handed him back the phone and walked to the hall. He did not change his clothes. The field coat was still gray with ash. There was still a dark stain along the left forearm where he had carried Cynthia through the ruins and her back had pressed against him. He had thought about changing and decided against it, not for effect, but because the coat was accurate, and accuracy was what the next hour required. The room heard him before it saw him. A shift, a stillness, the particular atmospheric change that happened when an Alpha King entered a space and chose not to soften it. Bridget's head turned. Something moved behind her eyes that her face didn't acknowledge. Robert walked to the podium. She didn't move away from it. He stopped beside her and looked at her for a moment with an expression that gave her nothing, and then he set a folder on the podium surface and opened it. The wolfsbane compound analysis first. He read the relevant findings into the record without editorializing: chronic microdosing, extended duration, the specific chemical signature that matched the supplement batch Bridget had ordered from a supplier registered to a shell company that dissolved 8 days ago. He noted that the same compound had been found in his own supplements. He noted the dosage calibration and what it was designed to suppress. He let the room sit with that. Then the communication logs. 14 months of them, a number that made the hall go quiet in a new way, the way of people recalculating. He did not read all of them. He read 3. The dates, the content, the recipient, a registered contact name that meant nothing, and then the actual routing data his intelligence team had traced to a satellite communicator registered to the Ashfall Pack's northern outpost. Bridget said his name. Her voice had changed, the grief register was gone, replaced by something more careful. He played the GPS data on the hall's main screen. Her vehicle. The estate. The timestamp, 3 minutes before the nursery alarm triggered. The route, not toward the pack hospital, not toward the guard station, not toward any of the destinations a Luna fleeing in fear would logically choose. 3 miles northeast. The scenic overlook on the mountain road. The vehicle icon sat motionless for 47 minutes while, behind it on the map, the estate's north wing burned. Then the audio. Her own voice, from her own phone, recorded by the vehicle's automatic system when it idled past the activation threshold. 7 sentences. She spoke them to a man she called Terry, and she used the word clean to describe what the fire would accomplish, and she used the word finally twice. The hall was absolutely silent. Robert closed the folder. The enforcers were already moving when Bridget stepped back from the podium. She didn't run, he noted that, filed it. She stood straight and let them take her arms, and when the silver restraints closed over her wrists she looked at Robert with something that was almost honest. "You don't know what you've started," she said. "Terry won't stop because you've taken me. He'll." "I know," Robert said. She searched his face. Whatever she found there made her stop talking. They took her out through the side entrance. Robert watched her go and felt the political victory settle over him like a coat that didn't fit, necessary, correct, and nowhere near enough. Bridget had been the mechanism. The hand on the door. Terry was the one who had built the door. The War Council met in the fortress's lower strategy room, stone walls, no windows, a map table that had been in the Ironwood Pack for 4 generations. 12 men around it. Generals, elders, the heads of the 3 major warrior units. The kind of room where decisions got made and the people who cleaned up after those decisions were never invited in to observe them. Robert brought Cynthia anyway. She was still in the hospital-issue clothes, a borrowed jacket over the bandaging that covered her back. She moved carefully, not slowly, but with the specific deliberateness of someone who had learned exactly which movements cost what. She took the chair Robert indicated at the table's edge and folded her hands in front of her and looked at the map. Commander Voss waited approximately 40 seconds before speaking. He was the eldest of the generals, broad, silver-haired, the kind of man whose authority had never been seriously questioned and who therefore had no practice managing the expression that crossed his face when it was. He looked at Cynthia the way he might look at a chair someone had inexplicably placed in the wrong room. "Alpha." He kept his voice measured. "With respect. She is a rejected Omega who cannot complete a full shift. The medical report is in the briefing. What, precisely, is she expected to contribute to a military strategy session?" Cynthia did not look up from the map. Robert said, "Continue the briefing." The intelligence officer laid out what they had. Terry's Ashfall Pack had been moving forces for 3 weeks. The pattern suggested a staging operation, supplies, personnel, heavy equipment, concentrated in the eastern contested forest along the Ironwood border. The working theory was a border breach coordinated with an internal destabilization. Hit the border, hit the leadership simultaneously. Classic coup architecture. Cynthia was still looking at the map. The officer finished. The generals began to argue about response positions. Voss favored a preemptive strike on the eastern forest concentration, heavy units, fast engagement, cut the operation off before it reached the border. 2 others agreed. The debate developed the momentum of men who had already decided and were performing deliberation. "That's not where he is." The room stopped. Cynthia had not raised her voice. She had simply spoken into a pause, precisely and without apology, the way someone speaks when they are stating a fact rather than offering an opinion. Voss turned to look at her with an expression that had moved past contempt into something closer to genuine surprise that she had spoken at all. She stood and leaned over the map. Her jacket shifted and the edge of the bandaging showed at her collar and no one mentioned it. "The eastern forest concentration is a decoy." She pointed to the border region. "The supply weight is wrong for a staging operation, too light on medical units, too heavy on mobile comms equipment. That's a signal array, not a forward base. He's broadcasting from there to make your satellites look east." Her finger moved across the map to a gray unmarked zone in the neutral territory, the administrative gap between Ironwood and Ashfall jurisdiction, 30 miles west of the border. The Callaway Industrial Compound. Decommissioned 4 years ago. Bridget's family trust acquired it quietly through a property holding registered in a different name. I signed for supply deliveries there twice in the last year. The drivers came through the service entrance, they complained about the access road, and said the main route was always blocked by equipment running at odd hours. She straightened. "The medical units are there. The heavy personnel are there. The eastern forest is noisy. The intelligence officer was already at the satellite terminal. The room waited. The images resolved in segments, thermal overlay, structure mapping, heat signature clustering inside the compound's largest warehouse building. Hundreds of signatures. Voss looked at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at Cynthia. Something in his face shifted, not warmth, not apology, but the particular recalibration of a man who respects accuracy above his own preferences. "Luna," he said, quietly, as though he hadn't planned to say it and was noting the surprise of it himself. Robert was already moving toward the communications terminal to authorize the satellite confirmation request when the council room's main screen activated without prompt, an incoming signal, force channel, the kind that overrode standard protocols. Terry's face filled the screen. He looked exactly as Robert had expected, composed, unhurried, the particular ease of a man who believed the next move was his. Behind him, visible in the frame's edge, was a chair. In the chair was Declan, wrists in a silver chain, one eye swollen shut, breathing. "You found the compound," Terry said pleasantly. "Faster than I expected. She's useful." His eyes moved to Cynthia. "Which is exactly why I need you to understand how this conversation ends, Robert. Come to the Callaway site. Tonight. Alone." A pause. "Or I start returning your beta in pieces." Robert left at 9. He took 2 vehicles, 1 real, 1 decoy, and 3 enforcers he trusted, which was a direct violation of Terry's terms and the only rational response to them. He kissed Eli on the forehead and Cole on the top of his head and told them both he would be back before breakfast. Cole asked if he could have the good porridge. Robert said yes. He did not look at Cynthia when he left because if he looked at her he would say something, and there was nothing useful to say. She watched the convoy move through the gate from the corridor window and then she went to find the boys. The panic shelter was 3 floors below the main residential wing, reinforced stone, independent ventilation, a week of food and water, a secure line to Robert's direct communications channel. It had been built into the estate's foundation during the border wars a generation ago and updated twice since. Cynthia had found it 6 months into her time at the estate, the way she found most things, by being invisible in rooms where people discussed them without noticing her. She told Eli and Cole it was a storm drill. Cole accepted this immediately and asked if they could bring the wooden wolf figures from the nursery. Eli looked at her with Robert's eyes, too steady, too measuring for a 4-year-old, and said there wasn't a storm. She told him he was right, that it was practice for when there was one, and that practice only worked if they treated it like the real thing. He considered this and then picked up his wolf figure and led his brother to the stairs. Lieutenant Harlan was at the shelter entrance when they arrived. He was one of 12 inner guard officers assigned to the estate's residential wing, senior rank, 8 years of service, the kind of record that made him unremarkable in exactly the right way. He nodded to her when she brought the boys through and took up his post outside the shelter door, and Cynthia noted the nod and filed it and got the boys settled. She read to them for 20 minutes. Cole fell asleep. Eli stayed awake watching her with that unsettling composure until his eyes finally closed. She set the book down and sat with the silence and let her senses do what they did in quiet, spread out, layer the room, catalog. The ventilation was running. The emergency lighting was on its backup cycle, which was correct for a drill. The secure line indicator showed green. She became aware of the scent gradually, the way you become aware of a sound that has been present for some time before you consciously register it. Cedar oil. She had smelled it before. Not here, at the service entrance, on the crates that came through twice from the Callaway compound's supply route. A specific grade of cedar oil used as a scent suppressant, the kind that wasn't commercially available and had no reason to be on an estate supply shipment. She had noted it at the time the way she noted everything, quietly, without reaction, stored without context until context arrived. It was coming from outside the shelter door. Cynthia stood. She moved to the door and opened it, and Harlan turned from his post, and in the second before his expression arranged itself into the correct shape she saw what was underneath it. "The cedar oil," she said. "The crates. You signed them through the service gate." He didn't deny it. That was the thing, he simply didn't bother. The performance dropped with a completeness that told her it had been tiring to maintain, and what replaced it was almost restful in its honesty. "You're more observant than Bridget said," he told her. "She said you were quiet. She didn't say you were watching." Everyone watches, Cynthia said. Most people just don't know what to look for. Harlan smiled. It didn't reach anywhere it should have. He took one step back from the doorway and the shelter door swung inward, not from him, from the mechanism on the outside panel, the one that required a senior guard's access code to operate. The lock engaged with a sound like a fist closing. From somewhere above them, deep in the estate walls, she heard boots. Not one set. Many. Moving through the internal corridors with the coordinated timing of people who had been waiting for a signal and had just received it. Cynthia turned back into the shelter. Cole was still asleep. Eli was sitting up, watching her with those eyes. Is it a real storm? He asked. She looked at the sealed door. She looked at the ventilation grate in the far wall, 40 centimeters across, angled down toward the lower garage, sized for airflow and absolutely nothing else. Yes, she said quietly. But we're going to be all right. She began to move. She got Cole through the ventilation shaft first because he was smaller and because Eli would wait. She had learned that about them. Cole moved on instinct, Eli moved on understanding, and right now instinct was the more useful quality. She pulled the grate from the wall with her hands, the screws already loosened from when she had worked them free during the first 10 minutes after the door sealed, using the edge of a supply tin from the emergency stores. Her back screamed through the movement and she breathed through it and did not stop moving. Cole went in without argument. She told him it was like the tunnel game they played in the residential wing and he accepted this and disappeared into the dark. She boosted Eli to the opening and he paused and looked at her. You're not coming yet, he said. I'm right behind you. Stay with your brother. When you reach the drop, you land on the pile of canvas at the bottom, I put it there. Then you go to the blue vehicle in the garage bay and you get in the back and you stay down. Do you understand me? He looked at her for one more second with those eyes. Then he went. She replaced the grate and turned around. The door came off its hinges 40 seconds later. Not from cutting, they had switched to a hydraulic ram, faster, less precise. It came inward in 2 pieces and Harlan's men filed through with the organized efficiency of people who had rehearsed this. 4 of them. Armed. They stopped when they saw her standing in the center of the room. Cynthia was not armed. She was a rejected Omega in borrowed clothes with bandaging across her back and bare feet on the cold stone floor. By every metric the pack hierarchy used to measure threat, she registered as none. She felt something shift. It started in her sternum, a heat she didn't recognize, not pain, not fear, something older than both. The wolfsbane had been leaving her system for 3 weeks now, since the hospital, since Dr. Marin had started the chelation protocol. 3 weeks of the suppression lifting in increments, her wolf surfacing gradually the way something surfaces from very deep water, slowly, then all at once. This was all at once. Her vision changed first. The room sharpened past the normal range, every detail acquiring an edge. Then she felt her wolf rise through her with a sensation like a key turning in a lock that had been frozen for 2 years. The tumblers moving one by one until the whole mechanism released and what came through the door of it was not the small and frightened thing the wolfsbane had been suppressing. What came through was ancient. Harlan's men stopped moving. She didn't understand why until she caught her own reflection in the metal surface of the fallen door. Her eyes, which had been brown her entire life, had shifted. Deep amber bleeding into a gold so saturated it was almost luminous. A color that belonged to no wolf class any of them would have been trained to recognize because it had not been documented in 4 generations. Pack Anchor. The oldest Omega designation, predating the current hierarchy by centuries. Not a fighter. Not a warrior class. Something that operated on a different register entirely, a wolf designed to hold, to root, to reach into the survival instinct of every wolf in proximity and pull it toward stillness and submission the way gravity pulls water downhill. She had not chosen it. It simply was. Down, she said. It came out layered, her voice and underneath it something that resonated below the audible range, a frequency that bypassed the thinking mind and went directly to the wolf underneath. All 4 of Harlan's men went to their knees simultaneously, their weapons dropping, their hands going to their ears not from pain but from an overwhelming instinct to make themselves smaller. Harlan himself lasted 3 seconds longer than his men. She watched him fight it, his jaw clenched, his hands fisting, his alpha-trained resistance pushing back against the command with everything it had. Then his knee hit the floor. Cynthia walked past them and into the corridor. Terry was at the end of it. He had Cole. The boy was tucked under one arm, not harmed, not frightened. Cole didn't frighten easily and was currently regarding Terry with the flat suspicion of a child who has decided he dislikes someone. Terry held a silver-edged blade in his free hand and wore the expression of a man who had expected to find a broken omega and was recalibrating. "Interesting," he said. "That's a very old bloodline." From somewhere beyond the fortress walls, 2 miles out, maybe less, Robert's howl broke across the mountain dark. It was not a warning sound. It was a direction. It was a man who had smelled her fear from 2 miles away and was no longer moving at a measured pace. Cynthia looked at Terry. She looked at Cole. She looked at the blade. She stood her ground and waited for Robert to come home. The decoy site was a decommissioned way station 12 miles northeast, a logical choice for a hostage exchange, isolated, defensible, the kind of location that said, "I have done this before." Robert had known it was wrong the moment he turned onto the access road. Too quiet. No perimeter scouts, no signal interference, none of the operational texture of a man who had run a 14-month conspiracy with Bridget's level of precision. Terry had not sent him to a location. Terry had sent him away from one. He felt it at mile 8. Not a sound, not a signal, something that moved through the bond like a current changing direction, a shift in the specific frequency he had been attuned to since the hospital room, since his hand had closed over hers in the ash. Mate fear. Directional, unmistakable, the kind of signal the wolf recognized below conscious thought and responded to before the mind had finished asking questions. Robert told the driver to stop the vehicle. He was out of it before it fully halted. Declan found him at mile 6 on the return route, freed, bruised across the jaw, moving at a run with 2 of Robert's strike units flanking him. The holding location had been a single guard and a locked room, which told Robert everything about how much Terry had valued the hostage gambit versus whatever was happening at the estate right now. Declan fell into step beside him without breaking stride and said nothing because there was nothing to say that Robert's face hadn't already covered. They came through the estate's northern gate at speed, the strike unit spreading through the grounds in the pattern Robert indicated with 2 hand signals. No lights. No announcement. The inner courtyard was wrong, too still, the guard rotation absent, the sensor arrays dark on the eastern wall. Then he heard Cole's voice from the lower level. Calm, conversational, the tone of a 4-year-old who had decided to narrate his own situation to whoever was holding him. Robert went down the service stairs. The lower garage was lit by the emergency strips along the floor, low, orange, casting everything in the color of old fire. Terry stood 12 feet inside the entrance with Cole under one arm and the silver blade in his free hand, positioned with the instinctive tactical awareness of an alpha who had spent decades in contested territory. Cole was examining Terry's sleeve with focused interest and had apparently been talking for some time. Terry had the expression of a man who had expected a 4-year-old to be a more effective psychological instrument. Robert stopped in the garage entrance. Cynthia was 6 feet to Terry's left, standing in the corridor mouth. She was upright. She was unharmed. Her eyes in the low light were still that gold, dimming now, settling back toward amber, but present enough that Declan made a quiet sound beside Robert that wasn't quite a word. Terry looked at Robert. He shifted the blade to Cole's throat, not pressing, positioning. The communication was clear. "You came back faster than I expected," Terry said. "She called you." "She didn't have to," Robert said. The standoff had the specific quality of a room where everyone was counting seconds. Robert read the geometry, Terry's grip on Cole, the blade angle, the distance, the weight distribution on Terry's back foot. He had done this calculation before in other rooms and he knew what it produced, a window of approximately 1 second if Terry's attention split, and no clean path to create that split without Cole in the trajectory. He looked at Cynthia. She was already looking at Terry's ribs. Robert had not told her about the move. Declan had, months ago, in the estate kitchen, in the category of things Declan did when he was bored and felt like being useful. If someone's got a grip they won't break, you don't go for the grip. You go for the pain that makes them forget they're holding anything. Terry turned his head toward Robert by 3 degrees. His weight shifted. Cynthia's elbow moved. The sound Terry made was not dignified. His grip opened, not a choice, a reflex, and Cole dropped and Robert was already crossing the distance, and what happened next lasted 11 seconds and was not a fight in any meaningful sense of the word. It was a conclusion. It was Robert ending something that had been running for 14 months and taking 11 seconds to do it. Terry hit the garage floor and did not get up. Cole had landed on his feet with the physical adaptability of small children and was now standing beside Cynthia with his hand in hers, watching the proceedings with calm interest. Eli emerged from behind the blue vehicle in the corner bay, where he had apparently been waiting with the focused patience of a child who trusted instructions. Robert crossed to them. He went to his knees on the cold garage floor and put his arms around all three of them and stayed there. Cole immediately began explaining what he had observed about Terry's sleeve construction. Robert held them tighter. Declan appeared at the entrance. He looked at Terry. He looked at Robert on the floor with his sons and Cynthia. He said, "The head is gone," in the flat tone of a man making an official report, and then he looked at the ceiling briefly in the manner of someone deciding whether the moment called for discretion, and stepped back into the corridor. After a while the boys' weight shifted, Cole going heavy with the boneless relaxation of a child falling asleep against someone's shoulder. Robert lifted his head. Cynthia was looking at him with the careful, measuring expression she used when she wasn't sure what she was about to receive and was preparing to absorb it regardless. He thought about everything he owed her. He thought about the ceremony. The Great Hall. Her chin level, her eyes steady, absorbing the impact of what he had done to her in front of 200 witnesses while Bridget stood beside him with her hand on his arm and the wolfsbane working quietly in both their bloodstreams. There was no single thing he could say that covered it. He didn't try. "Not yet," he said quietly. "We're just beginning." Her expression shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, something more careful than that and more valuable. At the beginning of a question she was willing to stay in the room long enough to hear answered. It was enough. For now, it was everything. 6 months changed the estate the way seasons change stone, not quickly, not completely, but in ways that became impossible to ignore once you knew where to look. The north wing had been rebuilt in the same dark granite as the original, but the new timber was lighter, the windows larger, and the nursery tower had a second staircase now, external, iron, ungated, that anyone could use to reach the second floor from the courtyard below. Robert had ordered it without explanation. Everyone understood. Cynthia stood in the dressing room off the main residential suite and looked at her left wrist in the morning light. The Pack's healer, Cinna, had documented it over the course of 4 months, the slow transformation that began 3 weeks after the wolfsbane chelation completed and accelerated when the ancient Omega bloodline fully stabilized. The rejection mark did not fade. Cinna had been clear about that from the beginning, precise in the way good healers were precise, unwilling to offer comfort that the evidence didn't support. "It did not fade," she said. "It changed." The scar tissue had gone luminous. That was the only word that fit, not reflective, not pale, but lit from within in the specific silver of a bond mark that had finally been allowed to do what it had always been trying to do. The jagged line Robert had burned into her wrist at the rejection ceremony had been rewritten by her own bloodline into something the healer's texts called a foundation mark, the mate seal of a pack anchor, the oldest form of the bond, one that required both parties to have survived something together before it would fully manifest. It had been waiting. All of it had been waiting. Cynthia pulled the sleeve of the burgundy dress down and then stopped. She looked at the fabric in her fingers. She thought about every morning for 2 years when this had been the first thing she did, the automatic, self-erasing gesture of a woman who had learned that visibility cost more than she could afford. She let the sleeve go. She left her wrist uncovered. There was a knock and then Eli's voice through the door saying they were ready and Cole's voice behind his saying he couldn't find his good shoes, and then a brief scuffle that suggested the shoes had been located by being used as a projectile. Cynthia opened the door and sorted out the shoe situation and took both their hands and walked with them toward the balcony. The pack assembly filled the courtyard below and spilled out through the main gates into the grounds beyond, 3,000 wolves, standing in the early winter light with the mountains behind them and the first snow of the season coming down in the particular soft way it came when there was no wind. She could hear the quiet of them from the corridor. Not silence, something more active than silence. Attention. Robert was waiting at the balcony entrance. He looked at her wrist first, not her face, her wrist, and something in his expression moved through several things quickly and settled into something she didn't have a clean word for yet. They were still building the vocabulary for what they were to each other. It was slow work and honest work, and she had decided it was the right kind. He offered his arm and she took it, and they walked out together. The council was assembled on the balcony in formal rank. 12 elders, the generals, the unit heads. Commander Voss stood at the front of them, his silver hair catching the snow, his expression carrying none of the contempt she had last seen on his face in the strategy room, and all of something she recognized as the specific gravity of a man honoring an obligation he had arrived at the hard way. Robert stepped back. That was the moment she had not expected, not the crown, but the step back. The deliberate removal of himself from the center of it. This was not his conferral to make. Voss lifted Luna's crown. It was not the one Bridget had worn. That one had been remade, melted down, recast, the gold alloyed with iron from the estate's original foundation stones. It was smaller than the ceremonial piece, heavier than it looked, and it had no gemstones. Just the metal, worked into the Ironwood Pack's oldest sigil. Voss placed it on her head and then, without any visible deliberation, bent at the knee. Behind him the council followed. One by one, then all at once. Below, the pack began to howl. It moved through the crowd the way fire moves through dry ground, one voice, then 10, then hundreds, then a sound so complete it stopped being individual voices and became something the body received rather than heard. Eli pressed against her leg. Cole reached up and took her hand. Cynthia lifted her left wrist. She held it where the pack below could see it, the luminous silver mark, the thing that had been written on her body as a wound and had become, in the end, the most accurate account of who she was. She did not make a speech about it. She did not explain it. She simply let it be seen, in the open air, without her sleeve pulled over it. She did not cover it. She never would again.